Thank you very much for coming. There was a bit of background that you should know to this meeting. Is a bit of a discussion with Peter about a field day and a whatever, and then we really thought, hey, this is an opportunity for you to come and hear Peter's journey. And why it's probably quite important to hear it now is because next year his presence will be absent. Because very sadly Peter will be leaving the country, but he's had such an impact, I know, in this community. And so today is about what he's achieved, what can be achieved, and we need to think about doing things differently. And I know many of you already the choir being preached to, but there's others who may not be so convinced. But thinking about how we look after our soil, how we can really benefit in a softer approach to our agriculture. So that's the purpose of today. We want it to be interactive. Peter is going to be talking shortly, and he's got the bulk of the talk. I'll then be up briefly. Then we're going to have a look at some equipment and so forth. And then we will go to the field. So when we go to the field, we're going to do three things. The first thing is we're going to go and look at some of the Seedco, the new soybean variety. And we're going to be looking at some navy beans from Good Nature Agro, and a little bit of a talk probably by Tim Jackson. And then the last thing we'll do is we'll go to the Nsaka by the dam there to have a bit of lunch. And just before we have the lunch, we've got Carbon Neg talking about carbon credits, which is a very interesting add-on right at the end to talk about that space for us and give us some information. So hopefully it's going to be quite a holistic view on a number of areas. I want to thank the sponsors today. So while it's about Peter, there are people who chipped in on the price and the costs and the organization of today. So first of all, Audrey from Seedco, thank you very much for your team. You know Audrey. Audrey's well known to everybody. Tim, you've arrived in the nick of time. Tim is representing Good Nature Agro, seed and so forth. So Tim, you'll have your chance. Thanks for joining us in time to hear what you're going to do later. Tim's going to talk about the navy beans in the field, so please don't leave because he'll probably talk a little bit about what they're doing. And then we've also got Carbon Neg. Carbon Neg is much easier to remember than the actual name of Ntsikelello's company. So that's Ntsikelelo with the shirt at the back. So each of those companies, together with Precision Farming, have contributed. I want to point out Chubby, who's right at the back with the fleet guard. So if any of you, I know quite a few have been connecting with Chubby at a distance on fleet guard filters for your fuel bulk filters and tractors and whatever. Chubby is the guy to speak to. And then otherwise, let's have a really good discussion. No question is not good enough to ask. So if you're sitting on something and you're not sure if something wants some clarity, please ask, because today is the day to learn. And so, Peter, a great journey. We're looking forward to hearing about that. There are 2 sheets. If you haven't got one, please share or go and find one at the table with some of the notes that Peter has prepared beforehand. Peter, without further ado.
On behalf of Christine and the late David and Kathy and I, we just want to welcome you here. I hope you enjoy it and that we can share a little bit of what we've been blessed with. First of all, I would just like to say how grateful Kathy and I are that the Moffat family invited us here 14 years ago. We were diaspora in Scotland, as many of you know, having farmed in Zim, and like many of you lost your farms. And so, David invited us to come and take over the cropping on this farm. He said he had some land and some old equipment, and here's an old bank account. Go off to PACRA and form a partnership, and you put in the sweat and get on with it. And so, but all along, David has been an incredible encourager, and it's very sad he's not here today. A little bit about my history. Kathy and I bought a farm in Zim in 1981, a little derelict farm. We were going to go to New Zealand, but Mugabe convinced us that we could stay, and we had 21 years in the country of our home, and we were very blessed there. I had one tractor, and I used to do conventional plow, how we were all brought up. And if it wasn't for good neighbors coming in to help prepare the ground, we would never have got off. But it got to a stage where we had one tractor, or two tractors by then, and for me to get a double crop in, I looked at needing another two big tractors. And we only had 140 hectares, and to try and justify that was just impossible. And then people like Richard Wingfield and Brian Aldreve and Mike Buttress in particular, some of you may remember them, said, why don't you do zero till? And being small and poor, I didn't have much option. So we bit the bullet, and we never looked back. It was a huge learning curve, because what people do on one side of the hill might not necessarily work on the other side of the hill. But so we worked at it slowly. Main thing was keeping trash on the ground and trying to get a crop in. Anyway, we became, we raised the family, and we paid the bills, and 21 years later, after being soybean grower of the year and in the soybean 4-ton club for about 12 years, and that was all due to the type of farming we were doing. As you imagine, 140 hectares, you don't have a huge amount, but it became very productive, and we were blessed. Anyway, we ended up in the UK, and after 7 years, we came here. And the first thing David said to me was, you need to go out and get local knowledge, because he'd seen a lot of our colleagues who came up and thought they were going to show the Zambians how to farm, and they came short. And Malcolm Richardson said to me, Pete, in Zim we used to farm like this, but here you got to farm like that. And I was told by many people, you can't do zero till here. Anyway, with the amount of equipment and the amount of capital we had, David wasn't going to put any money in. We bought a tractor, sprayer, and a car, and then we were fresh out of bucks. David very kindly stood surety for the partnership, and we borrowed money. Being a little bit older and wiser, I didn't want to borrow too much, so we went panono, and used what was here to start with. The first thing I did, apart from just seeing how David's team worked, was after a year, and I'd assessed things, the two old combines, where only one was working, pirating the other one, I managed to get them both going, and I found a straw chopper under the tree over there. I put that on, and I bought one of those windmill spreaders on the two combines. So at least we were putting trash down. And then learning from my neighbors, Malcolm got me into spin and disc. And so the Sawyers and wheat were doing spin and disc, keeping as much trash on the and not disturbing the soil as much as possible. The first crop I used a chisel plow and some old planters, but I still had clods like this, and I thought they would melt with the rain, but that combine ground up a lot of sand and dust out the back end. Even at the end of the season, those clods are still. So, yeah, the spin and disc helped us. And remember, we used to have those equipment days at the club, and we saw that big, beautiful Ortman strip doll. I thought, "Ish, this is what I need," until I saw the price, and the price of the tractor that you need to pull it with. Well, this is my biggest tractor. It's 110 horse. David had an old 110 horse, which did us for a little while. I think Andy's got one or two still of that same model. And yeah, Malcolm was doing Rip on Row. Anyway, through, in the old days we used to get magazines and we used to get our information like this. Now we do it like this. And WW, whatever it is. And I saw a website for Carrot Tech, and blow me down, they had 3 different models of strip till at my affordable price. So we borrowed money and we imported this one. This is the mid-range one. They had a smaller one, which I think Andrew Hunter's got, called a Maverick. And if I'd known then, I would have gone for the smaller one. But this one's been really good. I upgraded the planter to a John Deere finger pickup because some of the local farmers told me you shouldn't go for an air seeder. And I had that for a few years, and we just weren't getting the good results that people. I think possibly one of our mistakes is we were planting too fast. Something my friend Neil always reminds me about. Anyway, I saw this being advertised where the twin row could plant your mealies like that, and I was doing seed maize at the time. I thought it would be a step up, and I was all monosem in Zim. So we were in a position to borrow money to import this through RDO, and it's been fantastic. And I was doing the Soya Grow liquid application of micronutrients through the this applicator on the John Deere, so I had one put on this machine. That's a little bit about the equipment, and basically that's what I've remained with now. We're now putting our compost tea in furrow with this unit. I've always been, we had Andrew Beckeling and Gert Kutzer, who was Ecofelt and became Bonterra. In my early days here, they always encouraged me with what we were doing biologically and on the sort of regen side. And it progressed from there. There was a missionary guy who was involved up in Mbala about 10 years ago, brought mycorrhiza called Myco, whatever it was. And I think I was one of the first guys in Mkushi to use that, and we had incredible results on our seed maize. Another incident that got me more into the biological side, growing up in Zim, we learned from the cotton co-op days about scouting and monitoring your pests and predators. And so that's always been the way we've farmed here. Young guy, Colin van Niekerk in Lusaka, does an incredible thing on predators and sort of the natural control of pests. Audrey came one day and we went and had a look at the soybeans, and I thought, I've never seen stalk borer in soybeans. And it was the beginning of fall armyworm, and they were in their trillions. And Rob Stotter gave me some nasty chemical to spray on, and he said, this is all there's left, and it's banned after this. And it wasn't enough. So I went to Eric, and he said, well, why don't you try BioLeprid? So we sprayed, I've got 2 sprayers, and we sprayed the nasty in one and the biological in the other, and they worked just as well. And then I ran out of the nasty, and we carried on with the biological, and it worked. So after that, I stopped using nasty insecticides if I could help it. I even started using that BioLeprid through this into the soil for cutworm, because the pyrethroids just weren't working here anymore. And the cutworm were just laughing their way. And we had incredible, not 100%, but a good 75 to 90% effect, whereas with the pyrethroids I was getting nothing. So as we go to field days, Mick Selby had that big field day with compost years ago when Alex Holdings was still working there. And I thought, geez, this is what I should be getting into. But I couldn't see how I could manage the volumes of compost. But I always kept in the back of my mind, and then Johnson Sioux started coming up, and there's Simon and Ross Brennan were early pioneers than me in that. And the one thing I didn't like about the original Johnson Sioux was the complicated thing with pipes in it and needing crates underneath to breed. And then on YouTube, I picked up this system of a Johnson Sioux where you have a 1.8 meter diameter with a 60 centimeter central portion, and so your compost is 60 centimeters wide, and they say the oxygen can get in 30 centimeters either side. So you got air getting in through the middle and through the sides, and it's worked a treat. We've been doing this about 2 years now. Also on YouTube, looking at cost and everything, you try and find out shortcuts. And one of the webinars that I listened to, the question was how quickly and easily with the greatest response can I get into regen? And the answer was use compost as a seed dressing, and start using foliar feeds as a regular thing. The foliar feeds stimulate your photosynthesis, and it pushes exudates down into the soil, which feeds biology, and they multiply naturally. And the third thing was don't put on more than 50 units of N at any one time. So I did that before the Rolls-Royce of compost tea. And for 3 years, I never sprayed a fungicide on my wheat, and I had the cleanest wheat that I ever had. So we were controlling our pests and bugs. You've got a lot of these little hoverflies that take out the aphids. I don't say I won't use a chemical. I really liked Nico's friend, that lady from Ceres or wherever it was, who IPM, Integrated Pest Management. To me, organic is a dirty word because it's just a political marketing tool. And I really like this Re-Gen approach and integrated pest management. So we've got the tools to stay in business if we have to, but to be judicious about our environment and getting the things working naturally. Going back a little bit, it always fascinated me how God grows everything perfectly in the bush. And he never puts fertilizer on, and it has its cycles, it has its balance. And the more we learn about Re-Gen, it's all about getting everything into balance, in the soil. And it's fascinating. Dr. Christine Jones and people like that. It's a whole subject, but when you're driving along in a car, put a plug in and listen or whatever. The pinnacle of our operation, and really this last year, the crops this year, we used the compost tea on the last wheat crop, which was very difficult with electricity, but I'm sure it helped pull us through. And then this year, with the summer crop, putting it through. So we spray 200 liters a hectare on the stover, and that 200 hectares liters a hectare of compost tea on wheat straw and barley straw. By the time you come to plant your soybeans, that stuff just breaks up. It's just amazing. Whereas before, this thing used to ball up, trying to strip till through it. And so we put 200 liters down with the spray boom. And then I've put in 120 liters a hectare in furrow. And we found that all our maize and soya seed came through 2 to 3 days earlier than they normally did. And the other fascinating thing this year was that in past, 3 days after a planting rain, I would have to stop planting because the soil would be drying out. And this year, we went up to 7, 8 days without rain, and they still came through. And it just blew my mind. And the only thing that I can put down, my carbon is now up to 3% and climbing. And for every percent of carbon that you have in the soil, you're storing 500,000 liters of water a hectare. So think about that. I've gone into cover crops on the dry land. We do cover crop with an 8 mix, whatever we've got, and then I followed that same year with TEF the last 3 years, and then a crop of soybeans and a crop of maize. My weed control on those dry land have been a breeze. But on the pivots where I've gone soya wheat, soya wheat, soya wheat, even the chemical bills has gone through the roof. And last year, many of you saw my plantation of blackjack, which I had to combine this half first, and then that half, and hopefully got a few soybeans out of it. When we go down there, hopefully you see I got my recipe a little bit better than last year. So what I try to do is I try to get 2 of the pivots into cover crop this year. And I heard about navy beans. And so we got 2 pivots of soya and 2 of navy beans, which we planted in February. And I think it was a mistake trying to do a new crop in my last year. I don't think navy beans is a mistake, but I always maintain it takes you about 3 years to learn a crop. Anyway, we got as much advice as we can, but half of it has been burnt by the herbicide cocktail, which you'll see it's a bit of a dog's breakfast. So I hope you'll realize my pedestal's not as high as my friend made out. It's we're quite normal. We make lots of mistakes here. And in fact, most of my learning has been from mistakes. I hope I'm not talking too much. Are there any questions? I'd like you to see the compost tea unit here. When we got it going, the idea, Simon told me, you plug your tank into the pivot, and I'd never done fertigating through pivots before. Got that all sorted up, and then we didn't have any power. Yeah?
Good morning, everyone. Mine is a question, Peter. Have you done any testing of carbon in the recent past?
Any?
Testing for the increase in carbon in the recent past?
My last testing was 3 years ago.
Just for the sake of the camera, the question is, testing for carbon. Has Peter done any testing of carbon in the field?
Yes.
Thanks, Peter. Just so the camera.
I haven't done a soil test for 3 years, but the last one that Dave Hammond did, we were between 3 and 4%. And I know from the condition of the soil that it was way down in the past, when I first started here. I think the average in Zambia is below 1%. So to get the product onto the field without relying on unreliable electricity at the pivot, I decided to put it on with a spray boom. And I got a flood jet nozzle from Ken, the biggest that he had. And I just got a 1.5 mil drill, and I reamed it out a little bit. And we've taken all the filters, all the sediment from the compost stays in a screen. And then we screen it when we decant into the tank through a 500 micron. I think that's what it is. And yeah, we've had absolutely no blockages. We put on 200 liters a hectare at a time. Those 2 tanks are supposed to be 2,500 liters each. And I get about 27 to 30 hectares of compost tea a mix. It takes me 24 hours, up to 36, 48 hours to do a brew. The beauty of that is you look how much compost I've got here. And all my fields have had about 700 liters of compost on 350 hectares of summer. And in the winter, we did 150 hectares. I've got compost there that is more than my needs. And it's so easy to make. We make it with all residue from your ditchweed, when you glean the cobs, straw bales, rake up some leaves. So The Johnson Sues on the right, we did in about May last year, and it's down here. They've got earthworms in it. I emptied those 3 and I filled them 2 weeks ago, and it was about a foot above the top, and you'll see how much it's gone down. We made a traditional pile at the back there so you can see the product. So any questions, we can go and have a look. Have you got any questions now before we move?
Peter, what do you use for your green material?
Any weeds around, but when we clean the soybean seed, we end up with a lot of soybean chips. And so what I did is I just, to get rid of them, we put them in the compost, and that I'm hoping that's the nitrogen. It's certainly cooking enough. But if there's any weeds growing in the yard, we take the opportunity to yank them out and put them in and turn them over.
Do you feed any molasses into it?
Into the compost tea, yes. Molasses does tend to be more bacterial food, so you're getting a more dominant bacterial brew. We do use a little bit, but we use more the fulvics and the humics and the seaweed extracts. We put a bit of sunflower and soybean meal, sunflowers out of my cover crop. We just mill up some of those seeds into fine powder and put them in. Simon was suggesting that you sprinkle that over the top of the compost and it starts to grow fungi in it. We do that. Yeah.
So can I just stimulate a bit of discussion? There's 2 things we're talking here. One is increasing our carbon in the soil, looking after God's blanket. For many of us laymen, that means stop burning, stop plowing, try not to disturb the soil. That's the first thing, and build up the organic matter, which is the carbon we're talking about. That's on the one side of the equipment. The other side, Peter, as I understand it, is with the compost tea, is to bring fungi and bacteria and as many microorganisms that you can to inoculate and get the microbial activity going. Are those the 2 key things we're saying here? Can you help me understand the compost that's making the compost tea? The secret is that we don't have enough compost to put on all the fields. But what you're doing here is you're putting it through a water system where it multiplies and spreads out with the waters it carries. That makes sense to everybody, because I know, what is a Johnson Sue? Lots of us don't know what Johnson Sue is. I thought that was a divorced couple.
So it's a form of making compost that was started by a guy called Johnson and his wife, who is Japanese, and her name is Sue, S-U. So they called it a Johnson Sue. They were both soil biologists, I guess. And one of the things in compost to get a more fungal is to keep it aerated. And it means turning. And you see these big compost farms where they have these machines. I think, Bernie, you've got one, haven't you? And when you're going to produce compost commercially, that's what you need to do. But for a small guy like me, I can't justify the expense of that equipment. And so I went down this route. The Johnson Sue allows oxygen in through the compost so that the organisms that break it down are the beneficial ones that you're looking for, which is more fungal based. You want a fungal and bacterial dominant compost, but in a better balance. Am I right, Simon? Yeah, you don't turn it. So you don't.
Which is good because you don't have to sweat about turning.
Exactly.
But it takes longer.
Takes a little bit longer, but they do say, yeah. It takes a little bit longer, but it tends to be a better quality compost than that. But there's nothing wrong with that. And I hope you'll go, if you've brought your fishing rods, don't duck off to the dam just yet. There's lots of fishing worms there.
So, Pete, just while we're talking compost, so obviously you don't want to invest in the big machines, but more to the point is it costs a lot of money bringing all that material in, making the compost, and then getting the material out. So if you want to substitute compost for fertilizer, for example, you need to apply about 8 tons a hectare, which is not practical for most people. In a garden, fine, but not on large scale. So if we take away the nutrient portion of that, and you're just trying to inoculate your soil, then you bring that down to probably 40 kgs per hectare of vermicompost or Johnson Sioux, just to add the biology in from which it can go from there. But I think where people get confused between manures and compost is they just want to look at the nutrient profile, and that is what compost used to be. But good compost is all about the biology, not necessarily about the nutrient profile. Whereas bulk compost for a mulch or whatever, then you're talking your volumes work out, putting it under a mat tree or whatever it is. But for inoculating large hectares, it's not practical to move all that material in, make compost, and then move it all out again.
So in a nutshell, we were all brought up and taught you've got to replace the nutrients that you're taking out of the field. And if you're starting off, you've got to put it in there if it's not there. In the Re-Gen set, it doesn't, you got to change your mindset, because what you're doing is you're putting the biology, the workers back into the soil that happen naturally to do the work for free. Because so many of the man-made stuff is actually working against the biology. They're chemicals, they're acidic. It's a proven fact. I'm not trying to put my fertilizer friends out of business, but we've got to stay in business, and this is for free. I've been able to reduce my fertilizer quite considerably. On the wheat, the soils that you see today have had no fertilizer whatsoever. The wheat and the barley we've been reducing slowly. We're down to about 60% of what I used to do. And it's more about timing of your nitrogen, and not to put on too much at one time, and to get your proteins, to put it on a little bit later than you would normally early. It's a fact that the phosphates that we put on, only 10 to 40% ever gets into the plant before the rest is locked up. It's a fact. I'm not trying to sell a point here. And the nitrogen is another whole story about nitrogen, and you really need to listen to the other side of the coin, and there's so much new evidence that's coming out. If you think about our great-grandfathers and grandfathers, they never had the inputs that we had, and they were sustainable. We need to get back to rotation and protecting what's already there for free.
Sorry, Peter, one other thing. When you concentrate in that compost, basically you've concentrated it with oxygen and water. There's a time limit before
You can overcook it. That's the one thing. Secondly, if there's no zesco and you break down that thing, what happens? And thirdly, what happens if there's a bad cocoa in there? You're giving it oxygen. Are you multiplying the bad cocoa as well?
I can't tell you the scientific facts there, but what I can tell you is generally the good will always outweigh the bad. Secondly, when I bought mine, I fortunately had Simon as the trailblazer, and instead of going for 3-phase, I went for single phase, and on this roof there's solar panels. I do think you can overcook it. You put 60 kgs of compost or thereabouts into the screen, and according to Jacko, you're multiplying that by about 3,500%, because you're oxygenating and you're putting in biological food in the form of humates and fulvics and seaweed, amino acids. I haven't gone the extra mile like Simon making fish hydrolysate. But for sure, there's a lot more improvement we could do here. But this is working for me. It's working for me.
How long do you brew it for?
So a minimum of 24 hours, 36, 48 hours, but certainly 2 days and it's out. But it's so quick and such a small amount, you're not wasting it if you have to go and put it on the orchard or whatever.
Peter, have you done controls? Have you done the normal and that? Or are you convincing yourself that it works? Sorry to be blunt.
I'll tell you bluntly, I can't have the time, and I'm not nitpicky enough to put this trial and then combine that. I will assess it and compare it. I might do half a pivot, or compare it one pivot to the other. I'm not very good at keeping records, but I keep a lot up here. They reckon elephants don't forget. And I remember what I did last year and what this year. And I try and not go fishing very often. I usually walk around the fields every day. And I just use my eyes, and it's just gut feeling. But yes, I know when we went to Neil Conrad's, he had a very comprehensive list of his inputs, which sadly it's not my gift to get everything down. So that sheet that I've given you is a very basic one, but I can't tell you exactly how many diesel hours, how many labor hours, how many walking steps I did around the field. You know, so it's what goes out of the pocket that counts, and what comes back into my bank account, and at the end of the day I look at it and say, we're making progress.
I think we're not sad at all about where your skill set lies. You've been blessed with a very good skill set. The numbers speak. Peter, and I think this is a lesson for so many of us, is not big, expensive kit. The journey I love is affordable, practical, can be done by any size of farm, small or big. You don't have to move mountains of compost. But how can we get more microbes, a variety of microbes? Be careful of molasses. Sugar is a great thing to give you energy if you're on a run, but it won't keep you going. And the problem if you just pour molasses in, you just get one kind of bacteria starting to dominate. So be very, very careful. Yes, you get a quick response, but then it dies down and you don't know what you've got. This approach is an approach of checking and seeing, and that's what your skill is. That when you look at the numbers and look at your cost of production, this is exciting. It's been a great journey. less chemicals used, and that carbon and looking after the soil is such a critical thing that we need. Why? Because the most common thing I hear at farmers' discussions is the weather. And the chances of having bigger storms less often is increasing. If you want to stop the runoff, if you want to stop the water all flowing away to another country, this is the kind of thinking that we need. And we've been excited. George and I went to Kenya and we looked obviously around Zambia and seeing rainstorms on fields where it's rushing through the contours and soil and water gone, stones left behind, crop a mess. And we've seen other places where the same amount of rainfall hasn't left the field because of God's blanket, the organic matter, the protecting, making the soil soft. And then that is the accommodation block. That's the living space and the food space for the microbes. And so you've provided a space and now you're putting in different microbes. And that is achievable, small scale, medium scale, large scale. And I think that's what is demonstrated today. Look at this fairly lightweight piece of kit, and of course you can get smaller than that and you can get bigger than that. But I think that's really exciting about what we've seen today. Are there any other questions before we move on from this discussion into the fields?
Hi everybody. My name is Jeffrey. I'm from Kenya. Just in terms of proof that this system works, I'd just like to share a fairly scary and quite morbid statistic from Australia. We had a whole lot of farmers go from Kenya to Australia to learn about regenerative agriculture, rotation, zero-till, and they came back and they wholeheartedly put it in place on their farms. And this was about 10, 15 years ago. And one of the things that was the main driver of that decision was, if you go to Australia, they, unfortunately it's morbid, but they have a high suicide rate amongst farmers because they have droughts, they often have crop failure, and it's not a very good business to be in a lot of places in Australia. The suicide rate amongst regenerative farmers is about 5 times less than conventional farmers. Because when they have a bad season, those guys are generally okay, compared to the guys who are just following traditional conventional agriculture. And that's pretty good evidence in my book that this is the right way to be farming, especially as the weather becomes more and more unpredictable, prices become unpredictable. You want to make sure you're going to be taken care of. And if you look after your soil, then it'll look after you.
I was very blessed to be a Nuffield scholar, and my study was zero-till, and I was 93. And I went to the UK, and then I did my main study in the Midwest and in the States and up into Canada. And I went on a farm walk in Norfolk, and they dug a soil pit. And I took one look at it. You know, Richard Wingfield used to love his soil pits. And, you know, getting your plow pans and what have you. And I took one look at that and I said, you guys need to do zero-till like we're doing in Zimbabwe. And I got shouted down. And they said, it doesn't work here. When the UK government banned burning of their wheat straw, because they used to burn everything, and there was a pollution problem, and all the townies were complaining about the soot and whatever. So they all went to Canada and the prairies and said, guys, how do you do zero-till? And they said, oh, we use this, and we do this, and we do that, and we do that. So they bought the kit, and they went home, and they did this, and did that, and did this. And it failed. And they said, zero-till doesn't work here. But the moral of the story is, the concept works. What I do here doesn't necessarily apply to Andrew's farm next door, over that hill. But if he takes the concept and applies it to his environment, then it'll work. And we went back when we were chucked off the farm back in 2004. And I still had the Nuffield connections. And there was a group of young farmers who went on Nuffield, and they went and learned zero till, and they came back to Ireland where it rains cats and dogs. And they started, and in England, and they were doing zero till, and they said it's the best thing we've ever done. With their conventional tillage during the winter, they'd plant their winter wheat in autumn, and they don't land plan, and you have all these valleys and things. And you drive around and you see this lake in the middle of the wheat field, and in the spring, all that wheat dies. The young guys say, not a problem anymore. Their whole field would be beautiful wheat because the soil was porous and the structure was in the soil. And so they'd gone and done the right thing. The first time I went there, they said, oh, we need bigger tractors. And a big tractor in those days was 140 horse. When we went back in 2005, a little tractor was 350 horse and 400 horse. And yeah, diesel. And then they would send the guy to go and get a trailer 50 miles away, and he would go with this 240 horsepower tractor and come back with an empty trailer. And they said they were saving money and saving fuel.
Yeah, I was going to ask, when you're making your different brews, do you have a way of testing the quality? Like they would say,
You didn't hear me early on. I'm a simple farmer. I do a lot on trust. I do know Sally Gravenstein came here, and she took samples. A lot of these more learned colleagues of mine, they have microscopes and they check that. I just try and do the job properly, and if there's a bad batch, which we've never had up to now, it's tough luck. So, Takura, I'm getting old, and that's why I'm packing up at the end of the year. I want to go and enjoy some time before I can't enjoy. I grew up in the wrong era, and I was in the wrong class at school. I was in the C and D stream, and I did woodwork and carpentry. I didn't go to university.
Thank you, Peter. And there's some very good micro mixers available commercially as well.
Yeah, so that was one more thing. To get the right stuff, I've relied on EcoFelt started. Well, I had Mica, but that was very expensive. Mica Apply. And then we went to EcoFelt, which I think you guys are marketing. And then it became Bonterra. And so all my riser, mycorrhiza, my trichodermas, I'll put in to the tea as well. And we put it down through the rhizobia for the soybeans. We just put it in.
So it is helpful to start with a balance, and there's obviously clever guys who work on that space. But then it's the looking after like this, and it's interesting to hear no bad batches. Stick to the knitting. Ready?
Sorry, Pete, just to bring one other thing that hasn't been talked about. So obviously, if you can't do cover crops, crop rotation is important because you've said yourself that soya wheat is not a rotation. You've got to try and mix it up, and I think that's an interesting thing with all these other crops that might be coming up, is you getting all the different benefits, which is, I mean, that's been known about forever, crop rotation, but when maize price is high, we all rush into all maize, and when soy price is high, we all rush into soy. But even maize and soya in dryland is not a crop rotation. You've got to expand that out.
Yeah, so that's where TEF came in as a nice alternative. So the cover crop was doing the good, and the TEF I got a little bit more good out of it because it's nematode suppressant, and lots of organic matter with the roots and what have you. And then we never got the 1,800, 2,000 kgs a hectare seed, but I would always sell 600 or 700 kgs a hectare of seed, so I got money back, and I made a little bit of money on that. But the greatest benefit was in the soyas in the following crop. The other thing I've tried here is companion crops. It's something that is being talked more and more about. And we planted teff with soybeans, and it was one of my best dryland crops ever. What happens is you get a symbiotic relationship between the two. One's more mycorrhiza friendly, and the other one's more nitrogen friendly. The other thing we've been using in our cover crops, and I've used extensively this year, is buckwheat. Buckwheat and teff go really well because you can actually separate them quite easily, and you can sell the teff and you can sell the buckwheat. But the beauty of buckwheat, it's one of the best crops for making unavailable phosphate available to the plant. And so after the wheat, we have a 6 to 8 week period before planting our soyas. So I actually germinated a crop of buckwheat pre-soya on the pivots. And even on my drylands, you know, we always get a little bit of rain, which is never enough to plant the crop on. So I dry planted buckwheat this year. It came up, because it germinates so easily, it came up with those first few showers, and this year it had 4 to 5 weeks in the ground. And then we just terminated that and planted green straight in with a strip till. And last year's maize, on that drought, we went 7 ton. I've only put 130 kgs of compound, and I've put on, it's on the sheet there, I might even, it's 4 times 100 we put on 450 kgs of maize top, which is 37%. So it hasn't had much fruit. Is that figure there, Andrew?
It was 166 nitrogen,
Yeah.
31 P, 70 K,
And
18 sulfur.
Yeah.
Peter, you plant the soils without fertilizer. You do any potassium?
I used to use potassium, that polysulfate, but for this year and last year, no.
You plant without fertilizer?
Yeah.
You also don't
But I do give it 3 sprays with, one was the Omni Boost, one was Crop Boost, and one was the Oomph, which has phosphate. It has everything in it. Yeah.
So that information's all on the sheet. If you want to have a look at that, or if you want an e-copy, you're very welcome to get that from myself or Peter.
I used to poo-poo folio feeds because there was such minute amounts in them, and you know, the old school of learning where you got to replace what you're taking out, and it never amounted to that. But from work done in the States and everywhere, that's the way to go to build up your carbon, to stimulate the plant, and actually get the free workers to do the work of making the nutrients that are available in the soil, they're unavailable, making them available.
reminds me of a stat, Tim, we were asking about, is there money to be made? I love the stat that you've had years of your wheat of 8-ton yields from around about 400 mils of irrigation thereabouts. Peter, you know the stats? That you've had various yield water situations. But the bottom line is much less input with a really healthy plant because the soil's in good shape, the nutrition's right, the microbes are there, and then you get the yield. And I think that that's spoken for you as well.
Yeah, so on the irrigation we use John McRoberts Irri-Shed, and we have a pan, evaporation pan in the field. We measure every day. The lowest I've ever done on 7.5 tons was 350 mils of irrigation. But it depends on the season and what your evaporation, but I don't normally go over 550 mils of irrigation.
Very good. So thanks from Eric and ENG and the Precision team for the journey walked with you, Peter. Really a great learning experience. It's really a joy to learn from what guys do in the field, and it's been a great journey. So thank you for that.
So first of all, big thanks to Pete for testing our variety again this year. He did test it last year. As he kind of indicated, we did struggle to find the beans at the end. So we didn't really get results on it. It looked very nice when it was growing. So this year is our 4th year of testing this variety in the commercial space. It is going, we are going to have seed for sale this coming season. So it is going commercial. At the moment it goes by the glorious name of SZ02. So I've got to be honest, this is the 3rd year we've tested it in Mkushi. We started off in Chisamba. It's doing brilliantly in Chisamba. It loves Chisamba. At Chisamba, the minimum we've had is 400 kgs per hectare more than Spike, right up to over 800 kgs yield improvement on Spike. We are not convinced about its performance in Mkushi yet. 3rd year in Mkushi. 1st year was a dry land crop, 5 weeks with no rain. Spike outperformed it. It is not a dry land variety. So farmers, I know that we tell you stuff and you never listen. Please listen when I tell you it is not a dry land variety. It doesn't have drought tolerance. Second year was last year when we harvested more blackjacks than soybeans. So this is the 3rd year now. And this year, as would always happen, we've had a curved ball on one of our trials. We've had some root disease. So we think it's susceptible to Phytophthora. We've sent samples out of the country for testing. We're still waiting for the results. We are attributing that mainly to poorer rotations in Mkushi. I heard Ken say that soya wheat is not a rotation, but I actually think that most Mkushi farmers think that soya wheat is a rotation. So anyway, we've got a build-up of root diseases in our Mkushi soils, unfortunately. So yeah, we need some really strong varieties to handle to handle our root diseases. When it comes to foliar diseases, it is from a rust-tolerant line. So for those of you that always find rust, we are really hoping that if you try this, you're not going to get the rust. Okay? You can see inside here there is a little bit of sclerotinia. If you walk in, unfortunately, there's also a little bit of sclerotinia in the spike. Very late for sclerotinia to come in. It doesn't usually come in at this stage. You can see the crop's actually starting to senesce even and suddenly popped up. I think it's due to the cold night. Sclerotinia is very definitely a temperature sensitive disease. I'm going to hand over to Denson. I don't know how many of you know Denson Siami. Denson is our sales agronomist, and he does a lot of work with at our Lusaka West research grounds. So he knows all of the data from what's happening in Lusaka. We've been testing this variety now, I think, for probably 5 years in Lusaka before we've even got it into the commercial space. So I've asked him to just chat a little bit about plant population, because it's a variety that needs to be able to branch. The seed appears to be slightly smaller than spike seeds, so when you do a little trial like this, farmers tend to just put it in and plant it the same population, and it's not working so well as we've seen around the country. So yeah, over to you, Denson. Do you want to wire it?
We have a blackjack problem, because if you just look over there, I've got a beautiful crop of blackjack. So we were hitting it hard, and we planted this with the monosem, with compost tea, and on day 2 I saw all these blackjacks. Day 2 I saw all these blackjacks. I thought, okay, first thing tomorrow morning, round up before those beans come out. I sent the guy down here without coming down while I was getting the rest of the jobs going. He went 100 yards and he phoned me. He said, "Bwana, there's a problem here." They were up 3 days. 3 days. And if you look from Ted there and you count 16 rows, that's the 16 rows. And then the next 8 rows never got it. And the difference, it's only 100 meters. But, you know, to me, you want proof. Somebody asked me whether I had a trial. There's a trial. It works.
Thank you, Audrey. Thank you, Peter. So with, like Audrey has said, we do a lot of trials. I'll start with the PD trials. We have at the moment, we have over 600 product development trials across the country. That includes both maize as well as the soybean. This allows us to actually get a lot of data in terms of the different locations that we do these trials in. It gives us that information that we can share with a lot of farmers as well as other stakeholders in terms of where these varieties that we say can be grown in different environments and different areas, because we know Zambia, of course, has all these 3 different agroecological zones. And then, apart from that, we do have 2 permanent research sites. One is our Lusaka West Research Station. Then we have another one in Mpongwe. So these also feed into what Audrey just mentioned, where we have all this data that is collected that we can share with you. At our agronomy block, with this variety, we've had season after season trials, starting from 2021, with a very consistent data that tells us that in terms of yield, it's slightly, like Audrey has said, it slightly edges spike by between 400 to about 800 kgs on a hectare. And then what we also do is we do trials in terms of planting dates. So we've done planting dates starting from the 1st of November, the mid of November, 1st of December, mid of December, all the way up to the latest is 15th of January. This is just giving us a scope to find which is the sweet spot for this variety that gives us that yield that can actually go beyond 4 tons on a hectare. We also have plant population trials. These start from 150,000 plants per hectare, 250, 350, and then we've pushed it to to 450. So what we've found on this variety, we try to stretch it so that we can see in terms of disease tolerance, lodging, as well as yield. And we find that this variety, actually, the sweet spot lies in a planting dates of between the 1st of November to the 1st of December, and the plant population of between 350 to about 375,000. So if we look at the data that we have, and it's consistently showing that this is where this sweet spot lies, I think that's the best advice that we can give in terms of for you to get the benefit of SZ02. So it's a new variety, very good. When the population, I did counts when I came here earlier to set up the flags. I did, I think, 3 sites, and I found that it was, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Peter, if you had done counts at germination. So it's lying slightly above 400,000 plants per hectare, which is about 40 in a square meter. And that tells us it's slightly off its sweet spot, and that can actually be evidence if you count the pods and also check on the pod clearance as well as the number of pods that you are getting per node. So clearly this is showing that with evidence that we have dating back to 2021, it basically speaks into the correct sweet spot for this variety. And of course, as Audrey has already mentioned, it definitely needs to be in a field that is irrigated. I think that's all that I had. Thank you.
Sorry, just one question. Audrey, you were saying where you grew it and you got root problems. Did you have spike next door to it?
Yeah.
And did it have root problems?
No. No. And spike, we've seen spike go down with root problems in Mkushi. Specifically, Mkushi seems to be worse than most of the country for root problems. And I think it's partly our rotation and partly the fact that we have a cooler summer than anywhere else in the country. Yeah. So that's why, you know what, at the end of the day, there is no silver bullet for a variety, ever. It's always going to do better in some places than others. Last year we had a fabulous trial in Serenji, but Serenji grows better beans than Mkushi every year. So, yeah.
Was that at Kanwadi's place? That's not a fair...
That's not a fair question. That's not a fair question. And then the other thing also, you know, spike does that popping from the humidity. This new variety does not pop and it does not go green. So that's really, really positive, we feel. So yeah, it has some positives, but it's not a silver bullet. So yeah, I mean, we're going to have seed available. I would say try half a pivot. Last year it behaved, okay, the previous year it didn't behave, it was in dry land. But this has been quite a wet season. When the rain finally came, it's been very wet and soggy.
Audrey, what do you think causes that popping?
It's lots of high humidity, very high humid days. So we don't
could get it this year.
We don't get that same popping. I think you'll find it in this crop. I think I already saw some in this crop.
Already, yes.
I've seen it in Mpongwe. Actually, I've even seen a little bit in Chisamba, and Chisamba doesn't usually pop so
It can
bad.
really affect the sample, isn't it?
It's not easy to plant an irrigated crop on the 1st of November. The soil is so hot. You've got to know that you can... 15th of November, yeah. You've got to know that you've got the backup irrigation. And I mean, we saw this year that farmers really struggled to get their beans out because of the lack of Zesco.
Out of interest, what do you reckon is the ideal population of spike? Is it similar?
It is similar.
It is similar, but spike, definitely we've pushed it to around 400,000 and it's still given us.
I just want to say something on the root diseases. That's also a secondary cause from nematodes coming into your soybean. So obviously Mkushi has a very high sandy soils, hot weather, varying climates, and it's not always, the root diseases are not always your primary suspect. It's obviously nematodes. So everyone has to also be very careful of the nematode infestations in your land. Because I think obviously Mkushi is quite high in that space, whereas the rest of the country is not a big factor.
That's where we found the teff very beneficial in a rotation.
Yeah, Ash, I find it fascinating that the farmers in Mpongwe plant with a nematicide. Whether they do it for whether they're planting maize or soybeans or wheat, they will all plant with a nematicide of some sort. Whereas we don't seem to do it quite as much in Mkushi, and we really should be. But there again, I was going to say, I do think that the more biologicals you have in the soil, the less nematodes you get. And there are some very, very good biological nematicides available. Very good. So, yeah.
Did you
Let's
find
come
the
back.
bees susceptible to spray bait?
No. No, it's, on this one?
Yeah.
No, not really. This sort of sclerotinia and that is just sort of started discoloring it now.
It was still growing.
Yeah, no. So this field, the I saw red leaf spotch coming into this field, and being my last year, I wasn't going to take any. So I actually did an early fungicide, and funny enough, the Dina, which is more prone, didn't need it. And then Rob came round and we picked up a few things, and then he found some rust starting in the Dina. So we sprayed this with Prosaro 10 days ago. So this has had 2 fungus sprays, and my Dina's had 1. And I'm hoping that will see me through.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the nematicide issue that Audrey was raising. If you go with the biological nematicide, if you get it right and you get it working, it will always last longer per season, during the season than a synthetic one, if I may put it that way. The synthetic ones always have that fixed period it works. 4 weeks after 4 weeks, that's it. If it's a biological one where you've got a living organism, it will continue living as long as their nematodes live on. So it can carry you through the season much longer. I've seen it behaving similar even with your biological insecticide like your BT and stuff like that. When you've got a good cloudy season like this one, you spray once, it can see you, almost through the season. But the synthetic one can't end up halfway. So like she was saying, maybe I would recommend not necessarily supporting feeders theory. Like it would be a good recommendation to go with a biological nematicide in your planting. It might help you a lot better.
Good afternoon to you. Good Nature Agro. Just a brief summary of who we are. What are we? We've been around for 10 years. We're based in Chipata. Got another office in Lusaka. Our focus is edible beans, groundnuts. That's our core focus. I'm trying to push groundnuts and edible beans. We have a number of growers of growing groundnuts in Mkushi, and I'm trying to promote that. I'm trying to push that. We've got them in Chisamba, Mpongwe, Kapiri, Kabwe. Please, I'm looking for growers. Getting back onto edible beans, I've got Michael Temba here on my right. He knows all about edible beans. I've got Dr. Kevin Comfort here. He's our breeder. We've got a variety up there called Prime. We're trying to develop that. We're looking at trying to find some growers to grow in the winter. Hopefully I can make a plan there. I'll let them carry on.
I think most have been said, so maybe you can just come through.
All right, good afternoon, guys. So, I don't know, do you want to introduce?
Okay.
Yeah, so what we currently have is a navy bean. The navy bean is a small white bean you get for your breakfast and whatnot. We do have an export market that mainly most of our navy beans end up in South Africa. If you think of South Africa, they're importing most of their navy beans from Ethiopia and a little bit of it probably from China. So they are interested in the navy bean and also in the sugar beans. So we thought of Zambia to take advantage of that export market that exists in South Africa. So we used to have a variety called Lwangeni. It was brought in by Zari. Originally it's from South Africa. The challenge with the navy beans that you get is that your navy bean has to cane. It's all going into the canning industry. And that canning industry is a bit of a tricky industry in the sense that you need to have the right specs in terms of how it canes, the brine and all that stuff which is associated with the cane. So Lwangeni didn't used to can very well, and there was a little bit of a pushback from South Africa, the industry. They said, okay, we would want these beans, but it just doesn't can very well. So what we did with Good Nature, and we went on to the drawing board, we thought of penetrating that market and to take advantage of that export market, and that's how we developed Prime. So I'm the breeder. We developed that variety across there, and I've used most of the genetics, as you could imagine, from the Midwest of the US. So if you look at Lwangeni, it's not an upright variety, but what we brought in terms of Prime, we've developed it over a period of about 6 years. We wanted to adapt here. We shuffled things a little bit of the genetics and whatnot, and we got it right. It's a much better variety and canes very well. We have sent samples to South Africa, to the Bush company that does the canning, and it has passed with flying colors. And the productivity is good. It's resistant to anthracnose, which is the major disease of beans you get here in Zambia. That's a very devastating fungal disease. It also is resistant a little bit. Its sister variety called Pearl, it's resistant to angular leaf spot, another major disease of beans. We've mainly been dealing with smallholder farmers. So we thought of penetrating the commercial farmers to work with them. And Peter has been gracious enough to work with him and see how it works in terms of agronomics and adaptation to here and whatnot. He tells me they haven't put in much fertilizer on there, and I was like, we would have loved if you could put a bit of fertilizer, it would look much better than that. Beans is not soybean. The two are very different genetics. That thing across there, without any nitrogen, it's still able to fix about 120 kilos of nitrogen. These beans will be lucky if it can give you 50 kgs of nitrogen per hectare. The two are very different. I spent 6 years in the Midwest in the US, and just for own confidence, my PhD is on nitrogen fixation besides being a breeder. So I know very well what I'm talking about. The two are not geared for that. You need a little bit of fertilizer on the beans just to start it off. Because in the first 2 weeks, it's really struggling to put up all that nitrogen, symbiotic nitrogen fixation machinery before it could kick in and support that. So your beans are going to suffer a little bit. But with a little bit of nitrogen, you can give it a leg up and you'll have a better establishment to that. So I advise farmers to do that. In the case of Peter, I think we heard is a very strong in terms of taking advantage of the biologicals. The challenge again we get is that we need to inoculate if you are to take advantage of the nitrogen fixation and whatnot. So a number of things. But in a nutshell, that's a very good bean. We do have the export market for it. Always when you tell farmers, can you grow beans, they'll tell you it's a lot of work, it's a lot of what, with all the diseases and issues and what, and we hear it. And as a breeder, that's why we've worked very hard. I've personally worked very hard to put in resistance in there. Like I told you, you're not gonna get any anthracnose on that bean. We've put 2 major genes there that completely give you the immune for anthracnose. We also have a little bit of 1 or 2 genes that is able to control your angular leaf spot. So what are we saying? We are saying is that that's the best canning bean you can get in Zambia, as of right now. What we are trying to do is to get the growers, commercial farmers, to latch in on that. We are dealing mainly with smallholder farmers who are growing it, and so far it's doing very well. But we are trying to penetrate that commercial farmer segment. And I'll be happy to respond if there are any questions on that. That's on the breeding side I work with. And besides the beans, I am also a soybean breeder. So I'm developing, and I was keen to see what is going on there, Spike. We need more investment into R&D of soybean. The varieties that we're having in Zambia compared to corn, they are way old varieties. There is better genetics, to be honest. And this is what we are trying. If the presidential decree has been, let's produce 1 million tons of soybean. That's what the government of Zambia is saying. There are a number of things that have to come together to be able to realize that target, you know, the president and all these guys have been putting together. We need to organize ourselves, we need to get the agronomics, but part of that mix is going to be good genetics, okay? And I think we've been talking, if you look at how all these varieties stay on the shelf compared to corn, you are always pumping out new varieties, isn't it? Because there's better genetics. But we are just not pushing in the envelope much for these soybean. And that's why we are let's get more players on this space of research and development. So next year, we're going to be releasing soybean varieties, and we're going to be bringing some of those varieties to the Mkushi farmers. What we want is, I visited South Africa where they put these materials side by side. So what we want is, we are all trying to save you. You are our clients. What you need is better genetics, isn't it? You don't care where it comes from. All you care is how much yield it's giving you, right? So what we want to do is variety X for Good Nature Agro and variety whatever for this company and whatever, and see what works for you. Good genetics speaks for itself. Then you'll be able to make a decision. Say, probably like my farm where I am, this is variety I need to grow, and this is not. So we're going to be introducing new varieties, and we are looking at people who can work with us in terms of trying out those varieties of soybean besides the dry beans, and then make a decision as to what fits your needs depending on where you are. So that's my introduction I wanted to speak about. Today you can see a little bit of dry beans there, prime. We are also having sugar beans, which is another very important market class in South Africa. South Africans are looking for a ton of these things. They cannot get enough. But the challenge that we have is that we don't have the good genetics of those sugar beans. And again, we have been working very aggressively. As GNA, we've developed varieties that are resistant to the major diseases and whatnot. The other thing I forgot to mention about the prime, we've reworked the plant architecture to the extent that you can do the direct combining. If you went to the Midwest in the US many years ago, the way they used to harvest soybeans is that they put it in a kind of windrowing, you know, bring it together. Then they'll get a combine harvester running there, picking up that windrow. Some years back, they managed to transition all the way from that to direct combining. Breeders did a great job in terms of modifying the entire plant architecture so that you can get dry beans looking more or less like the way your soybean looks, and that way you can directly combine it. And that's what we've done for that variety. You don't need to have the beans lying on the ground. It doesn't lie on the ground. It will always be upright. And that's advantageous because then you can go in a combine harvester and at least manage to pick it up with your machinery. And that is important for commercial farmers because you need to mechanize in terms of harvesting all this stuff. So that's the other major attribute I wanted to talk about. So we have the sugar beans and we have the navy beans that are very important for the South African market, and they are of the right genetics. And we are willing to partner with you to test some of those materials, and also we are introducing new soybean varieties on the market. We thought I'll be able to receive questions if there are any. Yeah, sure.
Most importantly, what is the yield and price you can get for that prime?
The yield you can get pretty much even up to about 3 to 3.5 tons per hectare, very comfortably, and on farm conditions. In terms of price, I'm a breeder, so I don't know how much they are selling. Right? My job is to breed. So I don't know how much they sell.
So this is commercial, and they've contracted me 900 a ton. That's for seed, and that's 1340.
Yes, no wonder you're going to go up with a bang.
With the blackjacks.
And how many days to maturity is that prime?
You get it about 100 to about 105, round about that. So beans is an early crop. You can go in January and you'll be good.
And so when would you advise cropping that in our conditions? When would you say is ideal time?
I would rather go in January. You are still very good.
And the sugar beans, the yield and price for, because it's going to compete with wheat, isn't it? So what yield and price are you looking at?
Yeah, the sugar beans, we should be talking about 2.5 tons per hectare on farm conditions. Yeah.
The price?
I don't know.
Price is at 1,003 per ton.
One of the major reasons I was in South Africa with the Dry Bean Producers Association there. I did 4 months ago. I visited their facility. They said we need more sugar beans and heavy bean. and we're ready to take up a lot of from Zambia. But one of the challenges is that you just don't have the volumes, and the market is not very, it's kind of somewhat a little bit fragmented. Can you give us the volume and also make sure they complained about weevils, which was interesting. To say if you load a truck here, you didn't do your fumigation very well, you export it, it's stuck at the border, it reaches in South Africa, all these weevils are popping up. They're gonna reject that crop and they say, you better get your act nicely there. We are developing varieties that have some resistance to the weevils. I'm a breeder, and again, we spent quite a lot of time to try to get the genetics right with that. So what we are trying is really as good nature agro to get all the things that we want to get the right genetics and be able to compete at Zambia with Ethiopia. Why should the Ethiopians be getting all those beans down to South Africa? And if you look at our geographic location, we are pretty close to South Africa. There are a ton of trucks that are coming from South Africa, and we need to be sending them the beans there instead of them getting the beans from Ethiopia. And what the Ethiopians have done, they've just made a lot of investment in this same navy bean. They're exporting to Europe, they're exporting to South Africa. How did they manage to do that? Part of it is the government supported this R&D development of the varieties. So we need to have the right genetics. And then we need to have the right growers like you guys. You know, mixing with you, with smallholder farmers and you commercial farmers, it's possible as Zambia, we can be a major player in that. There is export market down South Africa, and that's why as Good Nature, we also not only do seed, but we also do source. So we let you grow the crop, and then we can buy back that crop because we know where to sell it. But what we need are growers who can partner with us, and we'll give you the right genetics to do that. And should you have a problem, I'm the breeder. I spend all my life looking at these things. That's what I do for my life, for my living. And I'll be happy to look at your crop and advise you in terms of what can be done. That's my variety across.
On the sugar beans, have you got an upright variety that can be combined, like you've said with the navy beans?
The navy bean and sugar bean, they are very two different things.
Have you got an upright variety for the sugar bean?
We have a bush type.
Ah.
So an upright variety, a bush type is still an upright variety.
But can you combine it with a normal combine?
Yes, but the pod clearance is not as good as you could get in the navy. I'll be honest with you.
Is there a reason that you called it navy bean?
I think it's because it's from the US. You know, the Americans dominated this whole thing at the beginning, and you know the attire the Navy guys in the US put on, it's all white, part of the military attire. So we look at that and we call it, wow, it's going to be a nice navy bean. So it's because of the US kind of American attire. If you look at it, they put all white there. But that's the canning bean. And I still need to emphasize, canning is king in this business. It's just not getting any variety that will give you 4 tons per hectare. You can get that, but if you send it to the Bush Brothers for canning, it doesn't pass the specs, they're going to reject all that stuff. Ultimately, it has to can. And that's where that prime is really a king. We've gotten the specs right, which is not easy combining canning quality because that's end user trait, and also putting the agronomics right, that it has the productivity, it has the resistance to diseases and whatnot. But again, like you could see, we've had a challenge here. Growers, we need to know what works for us in terms of what are the herbicides, what do we need to be putting in? Can we get the inoculant the same way we are doing for soybeans? If we can get the inoculant and get everything right, we can really make beans to be a major crop for us. And we're going to have baby steps in these things. Until as a community, the growers, we can get it right. But one thing for sure is that we are providing the genetics. Can we as a community, other players come in to provide the herbicides and whatnot? So that if we come together, we can get a crop. I think there was a crop ban here, whatever happened, I'm not sure. But that's a testament to the fact that we need agronomists and a bunch of all other people, in the community to work together to get, that production manual correct so that farmers like Peter would be happy to grow this whole thing, for Zambia.
Very good point. Peter, do you have anything to say about this crop?
Yeah, so I was looking for something I could plant later and get a cover crop in. So, I mean, that had a very good sun crop in there. So as far as a farmer is concerned, I was happy about the nutrients there. They germinated well. I would like to have had a little bit more seed to have a slightly higher plant population. The recommendation was 200,000, whereas the literature that I was given for more commercial produce was sort of to go for the 260,000. We had no problem with planting and germinating, and it came up. Where we came unstuck was I sought advice on herbicides, and the cocktail that I was given just came up, looked beautiful, and the sun came out. What happened was...
I didn't give the cocktail, eh?
What happened, and it was, we didn't have enough jewel to go with the other two pre-emergence. And so I had Frontier Optima. And I said to my guy, make sure you don't mix these, meaning the jewel and the Frontier Optima. But he needed to mix the 3 with jewel, and the 3, when the jewel ran out, the same 2 with the other. And he took me at saying only jewel, don't mix it with anything. And it's been our saving grace here, because that prime, which is a very shortened supply of seed, would have been obliterated, because we got rained out, and there was that last 2 hectares to plant, which we did 2 days later. And when I checked, I made sure that he was putting the right cocktail, and he went and sprayed the right cocktail. And we finished planting, and I went to Cape Town. I came back and it was gone. But for some unknown reason, where we mixed that cocktail with the Luangwani, there was a lesser effect. There's certain patterns here which are difficult to pinpoint where what happened, because one of the things is with beans, you need to spray as soon behind planting. And it seems like where we sprayed directly behind the plant and where we sprayed 6 to 12 hours later, they are better. Anyway, it's a learning curve. As I said to you earlier on, I don't know about you guys, but it always takes me 3 or 4 years to master a crop. And I took a gamble. I think there's a really good place for this. We've also had the disadvantage for this crop of about 2 rains of 80 millimeters and 100 millimeters in the same day. Not on the same day, but 80 on this crop. So generally these sort of beans don't like to be in the very wet zone. I did plant this on the 2nd of February, and because it was on the pivots, I knew I could irrigate it out. Yeah, there's a little bit of pythium coming on those where there's water running off the road. I've put a biological on there. I'm not sure whether the yellow leaves are pythium going through the field or whether it's a nutrient thing. We have given it 2 foliar feeds. We put that boost on, and then
boost.
I had to go in and spray Brazigan for the blackjacks, and right direct behind that I sprayed the copper, not the copper, the soya foliar feed.
What row spacing is the best? What do you advise for the row spacing?
For me, the recommendation in the bump that I got was sort of 40-45 centimeters. Yeah. So my twin row is on 90 centimeter centers, but it's 20 centimeters 70-20-70, and apart from going in with the drill, I was, you work with what you got.
Another question on these beans were always planting in the latter half of the season, so from January, February. Okay, that means they need irrigation to finish the crop off. And then that time in your wheat planting is going to be a massive clash. So at the moment, as things stand economically, our wheat is where we make most of our profits. Always.
Yeah.
Do well. Okay, so that's, you might have to sacrifice a wheat crop. So that's, I've been keen to grow sugar. We grew sugar beans in some effect. But it wasn't our major, wheat wasn't our major income crop. It was tobacco.
So maybe you plant it in January instead of February.
So how many days is the crop? 120 days.
We said between 100 days to about 110 days. It should be able to finish in that time.
You've got about another 2 weeks to dry off combining.
Yeah, because at about 90 to 95, it's at 90 days. It's about physiological maturity, about 3 months. So then I don't know the dry down there in terms of how long. It will depend on the environment. You know how much heat you're having and whatnot. But you can give it about 2 weeks of dry down for you to go in and combine that crop. Yeah. But if you are to compare in terms of the sugar beans and the navy is going to be longer by a fewer number of days than the sugar beans. Yeah. But again, what we are trying to do is, if you breed too much for earliness, there is a huge penalty. In beans, for every 1 day you are increasing you are reducing on your days to maturity, you are losing about 17 kgs. No, actually about 17 kgs of your yield. So that's a penalty, it's a sacrifice. So when you say this plant will sit in the field for 115 days, we can easily breed for that, very easily. Just the way I can easily breed for something that will sit for 90 days, but it's to strike a compromise. Earliness with productivity and to get a balance. So we do have now different maturity days. We do have the navy bean that is a bit earlier than the navy bean we are giving. But it's important for the farmer to know that, to say if you go for earliness, you're going to get a huge penalty for that. Yeah. So it's important to be transparent and explain these things to the growers. But where you have a situation you need to push in the wheat, I think it's very important for you to go for earliness. And what we are trying to do, even in the soybean space and also the bean, is to give you farmers a choice. The same way you get in corn. Corn, they'll tell you this thing is early, this thing is late. It's to fit in your needs where you are. You know, why should I be breeding for soybean that's going to be sitting for 120 days in the field when you are in the region in the southern part of Zambia where you don't get that amount of rain for that period? It doesn't make sense. So we need to segment that market and give you, and that's what we are doing in the dry beans, and that's also what we are trying to do in the soybean space. One other thing I wanted to mention is the soils also matter. The navy bean requires quite a little bit heavy soils. They will not do very well in sandy soils. So I wouldn't advise a farmer, you have sandy soils and you're going to go for this. I would say, well, probably going to be issues there in terms of you grow it, but you're not going to be as productive as the guy. The soils for Peter here are pretty good. These are suited for that to produce the navy bean with high productivity. So soil does matter there, besides, the genetics. You need the right genetics, but you also need the right environment for you to get the yield.
Another question on the combining of I don't know much about navy, but the sugar beans, they're very susceptible to split. Just touch them a bit hard and they split.
Yes.
So are you breeding to toughen that seed up so it doesn't split so easily?
We are not doing that yet in terms of breeding directly for that, because we have breeding is about incremental gains. So I have a priority list of the things I need to focus on. Fix the diseases, fix the productivity. But one thing I do make sure is to make sure in my pedigree, you have the right parents that is going to be possessing the genetics you want for that. And one of the things, like I said, even for this, we've used the genetics from the Midwest US where they do this combining. Because I need to have a starting point. Those guys have already mechanized. They don't get the splits which you'll be getting in other countries. Use those parents, but mix them with other stuff that we think are adapted to here until we develop a right fit for that. So I'll tell you, it's in my pedigree, but I've not tested for that. Until maybe when Peter runs, I see in the combine and he tells me, hey, Kelvin, come, your things are splitting. Then I'll say, okay, though I used a parent that was resistant, probably it got diluted by the other parent that I used for that. But we are not breeding directly for that, but we want to be observing for that.
Sorry, we need to keep moving.
Could I just ask one question, Ken? What about staining? If you plant too early and you get rain at the end of March or April when it's there, you obviously get disqualified for that for the cans.
Very important question, because then it's not going to sell, particularly for the export market. That's why the time you plant, you don't want to plant your beans in December. You know, if you plant in December too early or just too early, even in November, they'll be finishing when the rains are still there. Once they get rained on, the seed quality all of a sudden goes down. So timing is key to this. When do you get your crop into the soil? But you raise an important point. So to address or to kind of navigate that, I'll navigate with a planting date to get it right, to avoid the beans being rained on.
Guys, thank you very much.
So I'm happy to invite you also, all of you who are present here. We will have our Carboneg Field Day with one of our identified expert farmers who happen to be here with us also today. And on that day, we will run you through the program, what benefits are there for the farmer, and why you, as the farmer, should join the Carboneg program. Just to give you a snap of what it is. Our thrust, like I said, is soil health through the sequestration of carbon into the soil. When you join the program, we then sign a contract with you for technical support. What do I mean by technical support? I mean provision of information, provision of networking and other stakeholder engagement platforms while you transition from your current conventional practices to regenerative agriculture practices. The financial benefit that comes with that, because like I said, we're in the carbon market, we pay a farmer between 8 and 10 euro per metric ton of carbon gained or sequestrated every 12 months. How do we do that? When we start off the transition process with you, where we assist you with a transition plan, this goes with cropping and with grazing, for regenerative grazing. So it's cropping and pastures, both sides. We then carry you through over a period of your 5-year transition period. And during that period, we do trainings, we do interactions, we do one-on-one visits to your farm. We link you up with the experts to guide you through the process. Experts, I mean farmers like yourselves who have been practicing regen for at least 7 years and above, who have a story to tell, who can tell us how you've achieved certain things by minimizing your synthetic fertilizers, by no-till or minimum till, your cover cropping, your intercropping, regenerative grazing. So we use actual case studies to mentor you into the program. In brief, that is what we do at Carboneg. We'll be sending out invitations to, I think, the bulk of you, if not all of you, who are here present for our field day here in Mkushi with all the details. We are looking at having it between the last and the first week of April, before the Mkushi Expo. That I think is between the 4th and the 6th of April. Any questions? Are we hungry?
Yes.
I thought so.
How do you measure how much carbon?
We work with laboratories. So we collect samples. Thank you for that question. I missed that. We come to your farm when we start your transitioning process. We collect samples. So we get samples from different points in your farm, and then we take them to the lab for analysis. We keep those results. 12 months later, after your first 12 months of practicing regenerative principles, we then conduct the second soil test. So we conduct soil tests every 12 months to see how you're progressing. And the other good news is we also have got markets now in Europe for regeneratively grown products. So once you join the program, we'll be able to share all these things with yourselves.
And do you get that money from Trump?
No. Actually, I had a call with Trump just 2 days ago. No, thank you very much for that. Any other questions?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
What debt are you making with Carbon?
I cannot answer that question now. I would need our soil sampling guys to answer that. Thank you for that. Right now, I cannot answer that.
So we've just done a crop nuts. We've just done a carbon project in Zim, and I think we did 20, 1 to 30, 30 to 50, and then a 50 to 1 liter.
Yeah,
so I don't know if that's the protocol.
In Europe and England, it's going down to 9 to 10. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank you for that.
You paying for carbon or CO2 capture?
Carbon captured. Yes.
Very good.
Am I good to go?
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much to that great presentation. Very concise. I think with a very considerate thought to the hungry stomachs and the thirsty mouths. So thanks again to Peter and Kathy, Christine for hosting us, for the sponsors. We really appreciate all the effort put into this. We want to thank Ben Frampton from the Chingelo Training School. Because that's the lunch that we're going to enjoy now. So please help yourselves. We're going to have 2 lines, one on either side of the table, self-service. Please feel very free to go and help yourself. And me. Does anybody want to volunteer to pray? Very good. Okay, we're going to pray. I'm going to thank the Lord. Father, we were just discussing and thinking not long ago what a terrible disaster it seemed towards the end of last year. And then you gave us the rain. We're so thankful for all that you give us. Father, you are our God. You're the one who's created this beautiful world. Thank you for that wonderful blessing you put on this country, for the crops we've seen, for our health that we enjoy, for the fellowship we enjoy. Thank you for this food. In the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, we pray a blessing of safety on all of us. Amen.
Thank you.
Yeah.